God is light. I want to talk to you today about a topic that is both religious and scientific. And that's a good thing because what I do normally is teach science. So this is an idea which has been percolating in my mind for some time. And I put together some ideas first for a presentation in Switzerland, and that was in German. So you can see the first line, Gott ist Licht. And then adding a few more ideas, and we spent a semester in the Ukraine, and I translated it into Russian, and so we have Bog jest sviet. But a little easier for us today, God is light. These are reflections on what science tells us about light, and what light can show us, reflections on the nature of God. And these can inspire us, challenge us. So let's take a look at the importance of light. Light is definitely important. It's important in your normal life. Just ask someone who's gone blind. They'll tell you light is immensely important. Adjusting to the loss of sight is a tremendous task, living in darkness. Life on earth in general is dependent on light. We couldn't have life without light. There'd be no plants, nothing to grow, nothing to eat, no animals, no people. The earth would just freeze over. And in God's plan, right from the very beginning, light was important. Let's turn to Genesis 1, the very beginning of the Bible, the first few verses. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. And so the first thing we hear of God saying, as recorded in Scripture, and God said, "Let there be light." And there was light immediately. When God says it, it is. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. So the creation story begins with light, and light is absolutely necessary for anything that follows. But light is also very close to the Creator himself. It's the first thing created, and very often in the Bible we see this connection. God is compared to light. And let's look at a few examples. 2 Samuel chapter 22, verse 29. "You, Lord, are my lamp. The Lord turns my darkness into light." In Job 29, "His lamp shone on my head, and by his light I walked through darkness." And many of the Psalms, Psalm 27, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Psalm 36:9, "For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light." So many examples of this sort we could go through. You could do a whole reference study from the Bible, but we'll just look at a few more. God is light. At least God is compared to light. Ezekiel 1, the prophet says, "In my 30th year, in the 4th month of the 5th day, while I was among the exiles by the Kebar River, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God." So this is his first vision recorded in the book of Ezekiel. "And high above the throne was a figure like that of a man. He looked like glowing metal full of fire." Okay, so we're seeing the light, the brilliant light surrounds him, like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day. This was the appearance and likeness of the glory of God. The glory of God is amazing, and you can't separate this from the idea of light. So, do you remember what the prophet's reaction was? He fell on his face. He immediately worshiped. It was awesome. And Micah chapter 7, he says, "Though I have fallen, I will rise. Though I sit in darkness, the Lord will be my light." I think of the children of Israel fleeing from Egypt, and God leads them. It's the pillar of cloud during the day and the pillar of fire at night that leads them forward. Ellen White has a few extra words to say about this in Desire of Ages, page 52. It was he who in the pillar of cloud and of fire had been the guide of Israel. This is God. This is Christ, the second person of the Godhead. He was the desire of all nations, the root and offspring of David, the bright and morning star. So over and over, God is involved, is compared, we see the connection with light. The sun will be no more your light by day, but the Lord will be your everlasting light, in Isaiah. And in the new earth, the New Jerusalem, in Revelation 21 we read, the city does not need sun or moon, for the glory of God gives it light. The Lamb is the lamp. And there will be no more night. Again, God will give them light. We turn to other verses that say Jesus is light in the prophecy of the coming of the Messiah. Isaiah says, arise, shine, for your light has come. And the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. Then when Jesus is on earth, he says, John 8, verse 12, I am the light of the world. So Jesus is light. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So not only God, but now Jesus. And in John 9, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. He says this repeatedly. Jesus is our light. He heals us. So let's talk about what light is. What have we learned about light? Here are pictures of 3 different scientists who studied light. All of them studied light. And we can learn something about God and about Jesus if we study light. Let's look at some of this from the standpoint of science. Light is special. We're surrounded by it every day, but we may not realize how interesting and complicated and fascinating light is. So a little bit of physics here. You can take the teacher out of the classroom, but you can't take the teaching out of the teacher, right? So we're going to learn a little physics. Let's think about some of the properties of light. These gentlemen, scientists, disagreed about what light was. There are 3 different opinions. Let's look at some of this. First, Christian Huygens, a Dutch astronomer, mathematician, physicist, many great discoveries. He said light is a wave. We know about waves on the ocean, and you start the wave over here, and it moves, and it pushes up against the shore over there, so a wave can travel. A wave can refract, so it can bend to a new angle. That's the first little image there at the bottom of the screen. And a wave can also reflect off something, bounce. And so Huygens said, I understand light. It's a wave. This is the wave theory of light. But this is not the only option that Huygens gives us. Sir Isaac Newton, probably the most famous scientist of all time, he said, if I have seen farther than others, it is because I was standing on the shoulders of giants. So that's a humble statement to make. He said, I owe a lot to those who came before me. But actually, Newton took the greatest step forward in understanding how the world works of anyone we could point to. He was arguably the greatest scientist of all time. And many different things he studied and explained, but light was one of them. Explanation of light. Newton said light is particles. So imagine you're out there with your shotgun, you're shooting little particles, and this is what Newton thinks of as light. Little bitty things, pellets of light hitting. And he said, that's not a wave, it's things that are shooting out. So when you turn on your flashlight, these particles are shooting out. So who's right? Well, before we look at that question, let's move to the third image there. Not only a scientist, but a poet, famous poet in German literature, Goethe. He also studied light and made some contributions. He had a theory of how colors work, and he disagreed with Newton. Newton said light is composed of separate colors, and Goethe said light is indivisible. Colorless light cannot be assembled from colors. Newton said, oh no, we make white light by combining colors. Well, you know the answer now. We have done some experiments, put light through a prism, and it does reveal that it was composed of different colors. And we have the ability to separate the colors back out into red, orange, yellow, and the rest of the spectrum. This also explains the rainbow, the colors of light entering a drop of water in the moist air and splits the light into colors. So it turns out that Newton was right on this. Goethe was wrong. The rainbow is a good experiment we could think of that then shows how light works. And I think there may be a little parable in this. White light is a mixture of all colors. In the church, we need a mixture of different talents and different experiences. We need all of us. If we were all the same, we would be weaker. There's a parallel here. Humans are made in the image of God, but we're all different. We all have different aspects of the image of God. And together, in unity, we can actually reveal His character to the world. We need all of us. So I see that as something I can learn from light. Well, we are also imperfect. We are only a single color, you might say. And the church as a whole has the strength of all of us. Now there's more here in this little parable, or this little analogy from light. Those visible colors, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. I've never been quite sure what indigo is. I think it's just sort of a deep blue, but it's in the list, okay. So those aren't all the colors of light. If you go beyond the violet, there's ultraviolet. If you go beyond the red, there's infrared. We don't see those. Those are invisible. And I see a parable here. There's more than just the visible. There's more than what you see. If you send light through a prism, it spreads out into the colors, but it also spreads out into things that we don't see. I can put a sensor there and measure. Yes, there is warmth coming there. Even though I can't see it, there's infrared or there's ultraviolet. So this energy is carried by those invisible parts of the light spectrum. And it's definitely, they're there. Even if they're invisible, their effects are known. So again, there's another parallel. We do not see all of God's work. Parts of it are invisible to us. Just like light. Some of the light spectrum is invisible to us, but we can feel the effects. We can see that there is an effect. His strength extends even beyond where we are able to interact or even notice, but it's there. So we feel the heat even if we don't see the light. So let's go back to the two different theories. Huygens said light is a wave. Newton says light is little particles shooting out. Who's right here? Well, in 1802, Thomas Young, an English doctor, did an experiment. The first experiment that involved light going through two slits, the double slit experiment. Light goes through two slits at once, and then think of it as waves that interfere with one another. Maybe you've thrown two rocks into the water at once, and you'll see that the two different sources of the waves kind of they interact? Well, this is what Thomas Young does, and this proves that light is a wave. From 1802 on, we have known light is a wave. So it sounds like Newton's experiments didn't help us analyze light, but 200 years later, Thomas Young does this experiment. Unfortunately, then 100 years later, in 1905, Albert Einstein explains the photoelectric effect, and now this is proof that light is a particle. So I hope you listen closely. We have proof that light is a wave, and we have proof that light is a particle. I can't wrap my mind around that. That's just tough. So the proof that light is a wave, you see the waves coming from different sources. They interfere just like waves. This is how light works. And so we're sure it's a wave since 1802. And 1905, the photoelectric effect is completely impossible to explain if light is a wave. But it works perfectly if you think of light as particles. So what we've got is an apparent contradiction. That makes me think of a short poem that was written about Isaac Newton. Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, "Let Newton be," and all was light. In other words, Newton helped us understand the world. And then someone added another little couplet to the poem. It did not last. The devil howling, ho, let Einstein be, restored the status quo. So now we're confused again because we have this disagreement. Now, the photoelectric effect, as I said, only works if light is particles. So you can't really think of a wave coming and knocking out electrons. That's what the photoelectric effect is. Photo is light, and it knocks out some electrons, and we measure it. And this is not really explainable by the wave breaks the electrons free. They tried it, but it does not give the right answers. But if light were little particles and they interact, they have a collision and knock out an electron. So this is the contradiction. We either treat light as a wave and first little animation, or as a bouncing ball, particles. And since this time, we've had a wave-particle duality. And that is a seeming contradiction. So here's a little animated clip that would help us see how strange the situation is. So if we fire a stream of light, well, first we'll fire some particles. Let's see if this will start here. Oh. Not having trouble getting the clip to start. Well, maybe I'll just have to describe this. We'll see if... Okay, so if we shoot a wave through, we would expect to have an interference where some places are bright and some places are dark. But if we shoot through particles, we'd sort of expect they just hit the wall in certain places. And the strange thing is, if you send one little piece of light, one photon at a time, we just see one spot on the screen, but as time builds on, as time goes by, we get a pattern which shows the interference, which is only explainable by waves. So light has, I'd call this another attribute of God. We can't completely understand what's going on. I don't expect to fully understand God, and we see this in light also. It is beyond our understanding. There are some aspects of light that are wave-like, and there are some aspects that are particle-like. We must be content with using some analogies, some illustrations. we can't know the whole thing perfectly. I think about Jesus' parables. He didn't try to reveal all truth all at once, but he told a parable which helped people understand parts of the truth and get closer, more knowledge. And this is probably where we are now. The kingdom of God is like, he shows different aspects. It's like a sower, a farmer sowing seed, or is like a woman putting a candle to brighten the house, or is like a shepherd searching for his sheep. He tells stories that show different aspects of God. And when I look at light, one aspect, it's a wave. Another aspect, it's small particles. And it's somehow both. So when we say God is light, this helps me understand more because the same sort of analogy helps me understand. I don't think this means that God is made of light, that we should bow down and worship the sun or source of light. But it's part of the truth. Light somehow tells us something about God. If we were to say God equals light, like a mathematical equation, then you are lowering God to the status of something created. Light was what God created. Right? God said, "Let there be light." So we do not say God is equal to light. God is not any created thing. So God has there's some similarities. If you say God is equal to light, maybe you're kind of getting into pantheism. And in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we have an example of that danger. John Harvey Kellogg, who did a great medical work in the early days of the Adventist Church, then fell into a pantheist heresy. And Ellen White had to speak very seriously to him and warn him of this danger. He was on a path that led him into error. And Ellen White warned him directly of these problems. So I think if we say God equals light, we run this same risk. However, light can teach us something about God. There's more. In my PhD thesis, I studied relativity. I wrote about this. And relativity turns out to be very closely tied into light. I'll tell you just a little bit about this. Relativity is an area where there seem to be contradictions, like this in light that we were seeing. For instance, there's some very strange results, like your clock, I would say, runs differently from my clock. Time is no longer absolute. So there's the famous twin paradox, which one twin gets on his rocket ship and moves away at a high speed. This is a thought experiment. But we have done this, in a sense, by putting an ultra-precise clock on an airplane and measure, that clock is running at a slightly slower speed than the clock that stayed home. The world is much more complicated than we realized. In the twin paradox, one twin might experience 20 years and the other only 10. And the formula, which you do not have to know for a pop quiz, the two time intervals are not the same. Delta t on one side, delta t sub 0 on the other side, they're not equal. Time is different for different observers. And let's say what happens if that clock or that traveler was moving really, really fast. Now, we're going to just do a tiny bit of algebra. We're going to look at that formula and look at, in the denominator, we have a v squared in there. That's the speed of the person traveling. Or we're going to say a particle of light, which actually travels at the speed of light. So I'm going to let v equal the speed of light. We use the symbol c for the speed of light. So we're going to let v equal c. Now, many of you are whiz at algebra, and you could simplify that formula for us. Let's just see what happens if we change the v to a c. Oh, well, c squared divided by c squared, I think you can do that. That's just 1. 1 minus 1, I know you can do that. It's 0. Oh, wait a minute. How do you divide by 0? What do I do now? Well, think of how many times 0 goes into the numerator. It goes in infinitely many times. So at least in a sense, this is saying for a particle of light, time stretches to infinity. Wow. Maybe God's time is like that too. God's time is not like our time. So for a little particle of light, time just spreads out forever. And God can experience all time, all at once. His time is not like ours. Psalm 90, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day. Or 2 Peter 3, do not forget one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. So his time is definitely different. I think that this is another example how how light can teach us something about God. Let's read John 8:58. This is Jesus talking. Very truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. That text sends a chill up and down my spine. Notice that Jesus does not say, before Abraham was, I was. I already was there. No, he says, before Abraham was, I am. And of course, I am is how God introduced himself to the Israelites when Moses came to rescue them. He said, tell them the I am sent you. So this was known to be claiming to be God. But it also says that time is different for God. He doesn't have a past which is gone, and a present, and then a future which hasn't come. For God, everything is. He is. He is everywhere. God made space. He made time. He made it all. That means He is there before there was space, before there was time. And He can, actually today we can't talk about space and time separately. That's another part of relativity. There is only space-time. There's not separately space and separately time. God made space-time, and He can step into it. Just like the artist is not limited by a painting, okay, the artist makes this beautiful masterpiece, and then let's say he had the power to step in and live in that world. But he could also step out. If he has the power to step in, he can step out. Now, humans, of course, don't have that power, but God can be at any time and any place. So it's true when he says, before Abraham was, I am. And he is throughout all eternity. This makes me think, and in fact, it gives me pause. Can this mean that throughout all future eternity, in some sense, God will suffer the crucifixion? I hope he'll be able to wall that off, the time of sin, the bad time, and experience the glories of what for us is the future. But for God, he can already see the results. It's already worth it to him because he is in the future. Not just God knows the future, he is in the future. He is in all time. God is not limited. You pray, he can answer your prayer yesterday. No problem for God. He can be in all times, all places. God does not change. Here's another thing. Relativity shows us that the speed of light is constant. We've never measured it different. It's one of these absolutes. In other words, it doesn't change for different people. This is something that can teach me something about God. I, the Lord, do not change. God says through the prophet Malachi. And in James 1, every good gift and perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights. So we're back to light. The Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning, no change. God doesn't change. God is the same for each of us. He may react to us differently based on our needs, but God is absolutely the same. Whereas if I look at a human, we have these differences. Light is also the same for all. It's the same speed. But if I throw a ball, different people will say it has a different speed. That's not true for light, and that's mind-boggling. The same thing is said of Christ himself. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Hebrews 13. So this tells me something else about this. This is an analogy, another analogy about God. Many things do change. Many things are different for different observers. Your speed, your position. I'd say you're over there, but you say I'm right where I am. So position, time, speeds, all these things are different, but the speed of light is not different, and God himself is not different. God is the greatest thing, the highest that we can imagine. He is the same for everyone, and he calls us all children. Praise God. Light carries energy. That's another thing that we can learn. All forms of energy can be converted into light and carried across empty space. And we'd say, well, let's see, where did it come from? Most of the light we have comes from the sun. But the energy for the whole universe, I think God is the source. God is the ultimate source of all energy. And he created it. So this is another parable. We can see the sun as the source of the energy we use in our normal day, but ultimately, God is the source of everything. And it's his energy that fills the universe, that makes it function. I'll read you here a quote as we get close to conclusion of these thoughts from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 115. His energy, God's energy, is exerted in upholding the objects of his creation. He didn't just start it and go off and leave it. It is not because the mechanism that has once been set in motion continues to act by its own inherent energy, that the pulse beats, that breath follows breath, but every breath, every pulsation of the heart is evidence of the all-pervading care of him in whom we live and move and have our being. It is not because of inherent power that year by year the earth produces her bounties and continues her motion around the sun. It is the hand of God. The hand of God guides the planets and keeps them in position in their orderly march through the heavens. So as we study science, we're not explaining away God. We're saying, oh, this is how God has set things up and how he continues to work to operate the universe. It's not a dead machine that God started and then it goes off and does its own thing. But God is the source. In fact, God is not only the source of the energy, he's the ultimate source of everything. He is the unmoved first cause, first mover, the first source of everything. And his strength fills the whole universe. I like the idea that without light we can't see. In fact, we couldn't see anything without light. And without God, we really can't understand anything. Since we see God as the creator and we see the universe around us as his artwork, his architecture, his painting, his creation, it helps us understand what we see. Without light, we cannot see. Without God, we cannot understand. John 1, Familiar verses, we won't read them all, but we're reminded that Jesus is the Word, He is God, in Him is life, and that life was the light of all mankind. So, a challenge for us today. In Matthew 5, Jesus said, "You are the light of the world." Oh, wait a minute. We've just been saying God is light, and Jesus is the light of the world. But He challenges us. You are to be the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So that is a huge challenge to us. And in Ephesians 5, verse 8, For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of the light. So we are not given this challenge without strength. It is God who provides the strength. He is our light, and He asks us to reflect this light, to channel this light to those around us. We are to be the light of the world. And in the last days, the message for the last church in Revelation 3, verses 17 and 18, to the church of Laodicea, Christ tells them, you don't realize you're wretched, pitiful, poor, and blind. You can't see. You're blind and naked. So there's a solution in Jesus. And part of that solution here, I counsel you to buy from me salve to put on your eyes, ointment, so that you can see. Fix the blindness. So Jesus is our light. He is the remedy, the medication for our eyes. He can heal our blindness. In the words of David, let us pray. The Lord is our God. He has made His light shine on us. You are my God, I will praise you. You are my God, I will exalt you. Give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. His love endures forever. Amen.
All right, so our closing hymn will be hymn number 3.